This conference will now be recorded.
Perfect. Thank you. So now we can get started. Over to you, Basma.
Thank you so much, Helena. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much for signing up to contribute to our peer reviewings. Thank you so much for your commitment. And thank you so much, Kevin. We're hosting today Kevin Kessler. Kevin completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge in 2017. He's currently researching and teaching sociology and politics of education and global affairs. He's joining us from South Korea. Kevin, thank you so much. You've always been supportive to FIRSA, and we really appreciate and we're grateful to have you supporting us in Courage throughout this crucial stage towards publishing Volume 7. Kevin, would you like to say hi and maybe introduce yourself a bit more to our participants?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I have been a part of FIRSA now for quite a while, I guess since the beginning of my PhD. But it's always a joy to give back to the community. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today actually is about giving back to the communities that we're a part of. I don't know that there's a lot other to say about me other than, as Basma said, I finished my PhD in 2017, and I've been in Korea since that point. I came to Korea on a tenure track post, and so I'll be here, who knows, indefinitely. But you know, I'm having a good time here. In my research and teaching, like Basma said, it's in international and comparative education, is what I would say is my kind of large cognate discipline, but then I draw from sociology and philosophy to make sense of what happens internationally. And so that's a bit about my research, and then we're going to talk a lot more about actually what it is to be a part of these research communities and how we give back to the communities that we're a part of.
Oh, that's great. And I would just like to add to that I think Kevin is just being humble here, because the important thing and the main reasons why we invited him today here is that he actually has got more than 70 peer-reviewed papers, book chapters, and books. And currently he serves on the editorial boards of several scholarly journals, including Teaching in Higher Education and Review of Education, Pedagogy, and Cultural Studies. All right, so I think let's just first know all that we'll be asking Kevin two sets of questions. The first set of questions is kind of focusing on his peer reviewing experience, because I'm sure that there's a lot that we can teach from there. And the second set of question is like more seeking tips and guidance on how to write a peer review report and how to provide constructive feedback. Let me start with Kevin. When you first got into peer reviewing, can you tell us, like, when did that happen and why did you choose to be a peer reviewer?
It happened in 2010, actually. And I was doing my master's degree at that point at the University of Toronto, OISE. And I started publishing in 2007. So my first paper was in the summer of 2007. And by 2010, I was doing my master's degree, and I was starting to think, like, what is it like on the other side of the table? So I've authored a paper, but what is the process of working on a journal? What does it look like when reviewers are looking at my work? How do they go through that process? How does the journal decide what gets published? And so I thought, well, I wanted to start to get experience on the other side of the table, so to speak. So I signed up for a kind of early career research journal, very similar to Courage, actually, in Canada. It's called the Canadian Journal for New Scholars in Education. And they worked with graduate students to publish graduate school and early career research. So I started working with them, and then I did that probably for the next, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. And I continued to, and when I came to Cambridge, I got onto Courage. So I continued to think about what is it, what can I learn in this process of how to become a reviewer, how to be a better reviewer. And ultimately, I think, the reason that I did it was not just to see the other side of the table, but to improve the quality of my own work. So if I know what journals are looking for, then this should improve the output of the sort of research that I'm putting out there. So that's kind of when I got into it. And those first 5 years were really developmental. And then in 2015, when I was in Cambridge, I started to get invitations from more flagship journals. So not really graduate school journals, but more of the sort of research that we cite when we are writing our papers. And to be honest, I think they thought that I was probably a lecturer at Cambridge and not a PhD student, but they started to invite me. And so I had about maybe half a dozen invitations for journals like the American Journal of Education. And so I did a few of them. They were one-offs. I just did one. I gave my review to the editor. I don't even really know what they did with these things. And they never really contacted me again, and so on and so forth. But after I finished the PhD, they really started to trickle in. So these days, I think I do about 20 a year. And as Basma said, I'm on the editorial board of 5 different journals. When you're on the editorial board, you have a lot more responsibility, so you're reviewing a lot more papers for them. So I think it's that, that 10-year process of going through an editorial development process to kind of random invitations to be part of the review process to then being formalized on the editorial board of different journals. And yes, the reason to do this is to improve your own work at the end of it. And that's really what you're going to get out of it.
All right. Can you tell us a bit more specifically about in what way has it been useful to you? Like, yeah, you started with the expectation that you would like to improve, but do you believe that you got actually that out of it? Can you tell us more about how useful that was to you?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. So it lets you see what a research paper should look like, and it lets you know what the editor is looking for and what he or she is going to highlight as the crucial areas that a scholar might be missing on. So you get out of it that you know what the editorial process is like, you know what the review process is like. You get that opportunity to give back to other scholars. So I think really that's what you are getting when you are joining on to these sort of these review processes. But Basma, there's so many different things that you get out of this. So think of it this way, right? So if you're a reviewer for a journal, you are reading the literature. If the paper ends up getting published, you're reading the literature before it's actually published. So you keep abreast of what is happening in your field or in your discipline. What are people writing about? What are the methodologies that they're using? What are the big questions? And what is going on, in your field before anybody else is reading that. So if you are consistently involved in the process of peer review, basically you're at the apex of what is going on in your discipline. That's it has that sort of informative aspect to it of keeping you up to date. It has the technical aspect to it in terms of if you are trained or if you're learning through the process of doing peer review, you know what a reviewer is looking for, so you're able to tweak that in a paper. So for example, early on, when I was trying to publish a paper, I was publishing a paper in the UK, and a reviewer sent me back a very, not a nice review. It ended up getting rejected, but it was a very constructive review. And I remember the comment from the reviewer was, what is the distinct contribution of this paper? You need to write the distinct contribution of your paper in the first or second paragraph. And for whatever reason, it just clicked with me. When he or she wrote that comment, it clicked with me that this was a key detail that you need as an author. So then that informed me both in terms of my authorship, but in terms of how I review other people's work as well, to know that you need a clear contribution. You need very distinct methods and clearly detailed methodologies. So that then becomes something that I look at and I spend extra time on as an author to make sure that my methods are very clearly detailed. So basically, Basma, what you're getting out of it in terms of being a reviewer is you're learning how to write and to publish work better yourself. You're giving back to the community that you're a member of. And so that sort of contribution as a member of this community of scholars, it's our responsibility. We should be participating within this process of knowledge production, not just consuming, not just writing our own papers and publishing our own papers, but contributing back by reviewing and providing mentorship to other scholars who are trying to publish their work as well. So I think what you get out of it, there's a loads of different things that you're going to get out of this process. I would say, you know, the other thing that I'm saying it, but you know, you're contributing to the advancement of science. So the whole point of peer review is that we need to maintain quality and integrity of the scientific enterprise. And it's been going on for 300 years so that elite scholars or friends aren't the ones who dominate what is considered to be scientific knowledge. So when we are involved in this process, we're involved in the process of advancing science. And so I think, you know, first and foremost, that's really what we're trying to get out of this. There are a few other things as well. So you're not paid for this. There's no financial contribution, and this is a huge debate, and it's very controversial because the companies that we're doing this for, not Courteous, but the other companies that we're doing this for, are very much making a lot of money out of it. But you're not making any money, but you are getting recognition from the scientific community. You have relationships with the editors, and that can be beneficial in the future in terms of your own publishing schemes. This goes on your CV, obviously. If you are on an editorial board, those editorial boards are described in detail on the journal homepage, and you see the whole sort of you know, Lord of the Rings fellowship of the like 30 to 50 different fellows who are on the editorial board of that journal. And it's very nice to have your name right there next to other, you know, very well-known scholars in the field. So you're putting yourself out there as somebody who knows something in this discipline. And that's a very nice, you know, that's a nice thing to be a part of. You do very minor financial things. You do get discounts on products from the journals that you're, or the companies that you're reviewing for. But basically that's it, Basma. So it's being involved in this process is for science, you're advancing science. It has benefits for you as an author to improve your own scholarship and how you write. It has benefits for the journal so that the journal maintains its own integrity and quality, and other scholars are going to want to flock to that journal to publish their work there. And it has benefits for the authors in terms of the mentorship that they are learning from you as you are reviewing their work. And I think we'll come back to this, but I think it's a really helpful conceptualization for you as a reviewer to think of this process as mentorship. Really, our goal as a reviewer is to help make the work better and to help improve the capacity of those scholars. Now, Courteous, sometimes I think you know who the author is because it's open review maybe, but typically you don't know who the authors are because it's double-blind peer review, but nonetheless you are indirectly mentoring them and improving, you know, the quality of their scholarship. So Basma, there are loads of different things that you get out of this as an author and reviewer.
You've just listed some really important points and reasons why this is a crucial thing to be a peer reviewer or to try this experience throughout this academic career. And just following up with your point, actually Courage is a double peer, it's a double-blind peer reviewing. So they don't know the author and the author doesn't know the peer reviewer and stuff. I'm so tempted to really ask you more questions about how to try to approach journals and be selected for peer reviewing, but I'm so conscious of time, and I would like to get more into details about actually the reviewing process itself, because this is the ultimate purpose of this session. So, for example, Kevin, when you first receive a manuscript for reviewing, now the participants that attending session today, they will receive today 2 or 3 articles to review. So when you first receive a manuscript for reviewing, what is the first thing that you look for? What is the first thing that you do?
The first thing I do, but I'm just being funny here, is I look at what's the name of the journal. Which journal wants me to review a paper now? Exciting. No, I scan the abstract, so I read through the abstract. And after I read through the abstract, then I'm going to scan through the paper very quickly. Usually this involves scanning through the introduction, scanning through the conclusion. And if I'm interested, at that point, if I'm not interested, I'm probably going to say no on this paper. But if I'm interested, I'm then going to go back and maybe scan the methodology, scan the literature, whatnot. So I'll read the abstract very clearly, and then I'll scan the rest of it. And I ask myself 3 questions, and I need to say yes to all of these questions before I should accept this paper as a reviewer. First, do I have the expertise in this area that is necessary to be able to do a good review? If this paper is outside of my area of expertise, I need to say no. For example, you're going to end up getting lots of requests to review things from like engineering and some fake journals from nowhere. You need to dodge those and get out of that. So first question is, do I have the expertise to do this review? The second question is, do I have the time? So just very pragmatically, you know, I need to get this review done in the next month. Does it fit within my schedule? And if it doesn't, then again, it's okay to say no. You don't feel sorry not to say no. And the third question is, are there any conflicts of interest? And there could be. So I have had instances where I have scanned through the abstract, read through the introduction and the conclusion, and then I was almost positive that I knew who the author was. And I had to email back to the editor and explain to the editor that, you know, I'm not sure this is who it is because you didn't send me the name of the author. However, I'm pretty positive this is the person it is. If that is the case, I leave it up to you. I'm okay to still do the review. This is what I said to the editor. I'm fine to still do the review because I believe that it's not going to bias my judgment. However, in interest of full disclosure, you should know that I most likely know the person that wrote this paper. And the editor ended up asking me to do the review, but those are the 3 questions you need to ask yourself. Now, you might say no, or you might say maybe to one of those questions and then still think, well, I could still do it, right? So for example, you might say, well, I can't do it in the next month. The time schedule doesn't work for me. Well, then what you need to do is immediately email back to the editor and say, can I get a couple more weeks? So can we make this a 6-week review and then I can get it back to you? The editor is probably going to say yes because they need reviewers. Or you might email the editor and say, this isn't my area of expertise in terms of the topical area. However, methodologically, this is my area of methodology. So if it is okay with you, or if you feel fine as a reviewer, you can say, okay, you know what, I still have something to contribute to this paper, even though it's not my direct area, because methodologically, this is what I do. That's perfectly fine. So if you say no to one of those questions or maybe to one of those questions, there are still reasons you might still do the review, but ask yourself those 3 questions. Very key questions. And then Basma, the next thing that I do is, now that I've made the decision, like, yes, I'm the person that should review this paper, I immediately accept the invitation to review. And so I communicate back to the editor that, yes, I'm going to do this. Now the editor can rest. She's finished her work, so she doesn't need to worry about finding a new reviewer, so she can rest. And I know now that I've got 4 weeks to get this review back to her. So then I go to my calendar. All of this happens in the span of probably 15 to 20 minutes. I go to my calendar and I make sure that I put down on my calendar what's the date that the review is due, and give me about at least 7 to 10 days before that review is due that I can do my review. And what I think is crucial here is you need a lot of time to do these reviews. You can't rush them. So don't try to do them the day of or the day before. That's really not it's not going to be a good experience for you, and it's probably not going to be a positive review for the journal. So make sure you have ample time and it's clear in your schedule when you are going to set out that free time to do these reviews. So that probably happens in the first 20 minutes or so. I contact the editor back, and now that that stage is done, I'll move on to the next stage. So when that calendar date comes up, I'm going to sit down with that paper and I'm going to go through, I have a system that I follow that works for me. Other people might do something slightly different, but often the first time that you read the paper, don't read it straight through. It's not the most efficient way to read a research paper. Read the introduction. You kind of already know what the paper is about because you've already agreed to review it and you've done that scan. But now read the introduction very clearly to make sure that you understand what the research question is or what the hypothesis is that's being tested, what the contribution of this paper is, and then skip to the conclusion to make sure that that conclusion mirrors what that introduction said it was going to do, and what is this paper really contributing, and what are the recommendations for the field. So read the intro, read the conclusion, and then I usually go to the methodology or the literature review at that point. It just depends. Like if it's in my field, if it's in my methodological field of qualitative research and ethnography, then I'll go to the methods just because I'm excited. And I'm like, wow, I want to see what this person's doing. I want to learn some tricks in terms of ethnographic research. If it's not necessarily in my methodological area, I have to review a lot of statistical research, and that's not really my area. Then in that case, I leave methods for a bit later because it's not the priority of what I'm looking at. Then I go back to the literature and I make sure I go through this to be sure that the author has reviewed the relevant literature, that they're not missing anything. Again, it answers the question that they've set out for me, and they have very clearly outlined how this paper is going to contribute to that gap, so on and so forth, and then lead into the methodology. So basically what I'm saying at this point is the first time you read the paper, don't read it chronologically, don't read it straight through. Read it systematically to find the 5 important things that a research paper should have. So does it have a clear introduction that the audience can understand? Has it clearly detailed what the contribution of the paper is? Has it outlined and reviewed the relevant literature and identified what the gap is? Is the methodology sound, rigorous, and does it help to answer that question? And then I think we can add lots more numbers to this. What are the findings in the discussion, right? So you want systematically to make sure those things are there. Then, because if they're not there, then what you want to do is write some notes at this point. Keep those notes there that I think the methods really need a lot of work. And then you're going to come back to that methodological section later and really step-by-step detail what those issues are. So you're just making sure all those 5 things are in order. And if they're not, you're going to come back and really pinpoint what some of the issues are. And that's the first time that I've read through it. So it's a bit of a bounce around, but it's looking at the key things that a research paper should do. I've taken some notes. Then either later that afternoon, or sometimes I put it away and I come back a couple of days later. Then I'm going to read through it from beginning to end. Detailed, very sustained focus, making sure I go through all of those areas. And at this point, you really know what you're looking for. You already have a sense of what the flaws are and what the strengths are because you've already kind of read it twice. But now you're just doing due justice to that author who's spent months or years working on this paper, that you're going to give it the diligent time that it deserves to be sure that this is or is not of the quality to be published. And then you take detailed notes at that point, and then I'll write those notes up later. So Basma, this is what I do when I first get a paper, and then a couple of weeks later, what I'll do in the second stage, and then in the final stage. So you basically have 3 stages there. So the stage of vetting the paper, the stage of reviewing the paper, and then the stage of writing the review.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And you've raised really important points about the first stage, which is like having the first look at the paper. And I would like to say to everyone who's listening to us that we actually developed a reviewing form that we will share with you, and we try to include a checklist that actually aligns very well with the important points that Kevin has raised. So you can, when you receive the article, you can have a look at it, go through it, and have a look at the checklist to make sure that we cover the important points that Kevin has just raised. And Kevin, so all right, this is the first stage. Now they're going to move to the second stage, which is writing the reviewing reports, writing the peer reviewing reports, and trying to provide constructive feedback. Could you please provide us with some best practices or top tips for completing this stage, which is writing the report?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me respond to something very quickly before that I was going to interject. So if you do realize that you're not the right person to do this review, do get back to the reviewer. Maybe clearly detail to the reviewer what your areas are so that he or she can send you then an appropriate paper in the future. So don't feel, don't feel sorry about saying no, but be constructive with your response so that the reviewer knows, sorry, the editor, so that the editor knows what sorts of papers to send you in the future. So you're indicating to them that I can't do this one, sorry, but I'm willing to do another one in the future, and these are the areas that you should send to me. Okay, and I'm saying that, Basma, because I don't want you to get lots of rejections next week where people say, no, I can't review for you, Basma. Okay, so what are, you're asking for best practices. What are some best practices? Yeah. Right. Okay. So the first thing is, I was talking about it before, take your time. Take your time with these. Do not rush these reviews. Please don't rush them. I recommend that you read the paper 2 or 3 times, very much in the way that I just detailed, but that's the first thing that I would say. So take your time, be strategic, be detailed and specific. When you write a review for the editor and for the author, use numbers, use a numerical system. So, I've scanned the paper, I've read the paper, I've taken notes. Now I need to organize my notes. Don't just send back a sort of constellation of nonsense that it's difficult for the editor to make sense of what you're trying to say. So number your comments from 1 to X. What are the comments that you have pointed out for the author and that you would like the editor to take account of and make sure that these are addressed? In addition to numbering, if you are make specific comments, and when you make specific comments, use the page number or the line number of where that comment is coming out for you in terms of reviewing the paper. So it's not very helpful for an editor or for an author if you just make a general comment about a paper. You need to pinpoint where in the paper were you when you had that response to the paper. So what was the page number, and perhaps what was the line number when you had this sort of reaction to what you were reading. So those are a few things. So number, and use pages, so citations basically. So use citations to let the author know where you're at. And what you do then, because you're trying to organize this in a very coherent way, is you think of it like an upside down pyramid in terms of what you're writing as a reviewer. So at the top of the pyramid, you're writing a summary. You're just summarizing what you read back to the author and editor. Now, the author knows what they read, obviously, but the role of this summary is to make sure that you have understood what the author wrote. So it, in a way, justifies the comments that you're about to make afterwards. Yes, I understood this paper. This is a summary of what that paper is. Or, author, you might think this is what you read, but actually this is what I understood. So there is a disconnect between what you think you're writing and what the summary of the paper is for somebody who's disinterested in it. So you're going to write a summary of the paper. In that summary, you're going to highlight, like I said before, what's the contribution of the paper? What's the main thing that this paper is doing for our journal? These can be quite wide. Sometimes it's geographic. So this is a paper coming from an area of the world where this journal doesn't have a lot of papers out of that area of the world. Or this is a paper coming from a research method that is different from the methods that we typically use. So what's the contribution of that paper? And you If you are a reviewer who has reviewed for that journal over time, you know the journal very well, so you know the answer to those questions. If you're a first-time reviewer, you might not have the best sense of the journal, so you might not really know about geographical distribution or methodological distribution. So then you have that summary and you have that kind of outline. The next thing you're going to write are the main issues. So what are the major areas that need to be addressed? And you're going to highlight what those major areas are. And then under them, you're going to have minor areas. So what are the minor areas that need to be addressed? So in that sort of inverse pyramid, what's the summary? What are the major areas that need addressed? And then what are the minor areas? And then finally, at the bottom of it, what is your recommendation?
Mm-hmm.
Some journals ask you not to put the recommendation in it, and other journals do. So you have to know what the journal's expectations are. But do they expect you as an author to recommend publication, major revisions, minor revisions, or to reject? You need to know if the journal wants you to write that into your review. Oftentimes they do, but sometimes they don't want you to write that in there because those comments are going back to the author, and it might be a little awkward for the journal if one reviewer says accept and the other one says reject, and then the paper ends up getting rejected. There might be a lot of confusion. So you just know what the expectations from the journal are, but use that inverse pyramid to organize your comments for the author. Now, there might not be a lot of major issues. So maybe that middle section, there are no major issues that you really need to address. Well, that's quite fine. You don't have to write anything there. You write in the summary that this was an excellent, this was a very thorough, well thought out and clearly written paper. It has a clear contribution, and there are just some minor things that I would suggest that the author looks at before this paper could be ready for publication. And there are frequent reviews that are like this, so that's quite fine. And then you'll put down your minor comments. Now, question, what might be in the major section and what might be in the minor section? Well, the major section is, it's those things I was talking about earlier. If the paper doesn't clearly outline its methodology, or if the methodology is not rigorous, or if it doesn't fit with the research question that's been asked, that's major. That needs to be addressed immediately. If the paper is not reviewing the relevant literature, it's kind of tangential literature, or you would be surprised the number of papers that don't even have a literature review. There's no literature review. Well, author, you need to go and do a literature review. So those would be some of the major areas. Maybe there's not a discussion. So maybe there's not a discussion section, or maybe the discussion needs to be clarified. So you would put these in the major section. In the minor section, they're minor things. So they could be typographical, they could be grammatical issues. They could be issues where perhaps you as a reviewer want to say, I like your literature review. I thought it was really innovative. Have you thought about this work? Maybe out of this sort of other niche area of the field that wasn't covered there, but that might be relevant. And I think you as a reviewer definitely recommend papers for the author to read. So if you have a comment about an area that you think the author could improve, and there's a paper that that could assist with this, don't be shy to recommend those papers. It's very, very helpful for you if you're the author to receive this, because when that recommended paper to read is there, then it gives me an idea as the author of what the reviewer was thinking when they were writing these comments. So definitely recommend papers. Now here, maybe don't recommend your own papers. It's probably not the best practice to recommend that they cite you. But do offer some papers. That would be something that you could put in that minor section. So that's what I would use in terms of best practices. Be detailed. Another thing is very important, engage with the author's voice. So sometimes reviewers, they're reading the paper like it's their own paper, and what would I have written if I was the one who wrote this paper? And then I'm going to critique you because you didn't write what I would write. Well, really, we need to read these papers from the voice of the author, and we can highlight areas that we think are critical misses, but it's the author's paper, it's not ours. So try to engage their voice, and even if you disagree with some of their points, write constructive comments back to them in terms of how they might think differently about those particular viewpoints that they're offering. So those are just a few things that I would say. Be critical, but be constructive and be very detailed.
Thank you, Kevin. And you talked about the importance of being fully aware of the expectations of the journal. And let me say here to everyone who's attending is that actually the form that you will receive, like we mentioned, there will be a checklist to guide you through the first stage. And concerning the second stage, we will be asking you to provide a brief summary of the article that you read, which is like basically a very brief summary with your overall first impression of the paper. We will be asking you, like Kevin mentioned, to mention like what are the major issues in this paper, what are the minor issues, and of course you don't have like to fill out both of them, because for example we will be asking you to give us your recommendation. Do you recommend that we accept the paper as it is? Do you recommend that, for example, we accept it with minor changes, with major changes? So you will have to recommend for us. So for example, if you recommend that we just accept it as it is, of course we don't expect to see major issues in the major issues box, because it's a great paper, we'll accept it. So this is just like a brief idea about the expectations of Courage. And all right, Kevin, let's move.
Basma, can I interject for a second?
Yeah, sure.
So two things to add there. So you might be thinking in your head, if you've never written a review, how long should the review be?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a good review is usually 500 to 1500 words, so 1 to 3 pages. And the reason this is because that gives you adequate amount of space to be detailed and constructive with your commentary. It's not a good review. So when you do your summary, we're only talking about a paragraph with your summary. This isn't, you know, a full page summary, but give a paragraph of the summary and then do those major and minor areas within 500 to 1500 words, as much as you need, but at least 500 words. This shows that you as a reviewer really took your time with the work and understood it and you know, invested in giving feedback to the author. Now, a bad review is one paragraph of about 100 and 200 words that says, this paper is excellent, I love this, publish tomorrow. It's not useful. It's not useful for the journal or for the author. It's flattering. I think the author would be flattered, but might also be a bit skeptical. It's very, very rare for papers to be accepted as is. Most papers are rejected or receive major and minor revision requests. So a bad review is a short review. You need, I would recommend about 500 to 1500 words for a review.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and actually answers some of the questions in the chat box. So let's all agree, guys, that in the form that you will receive, we would expect that we receive at least 500 words in this form, as in like your impression, your recommendation for major revisions or minor revisions. And also, you will receive the article in a Word format, so please feel free to add in-text comments. You know, we have this feature in Word where we add in-text comments. I mean, feel free to do that. We would actually appreciate that if you guide like the authors more directly through like the specific points that they should pay attention to. All right, now let's move to, you know, Kevin, that Courage is a student-led initiative. So we might have a lot of our participants who are first-time reviewers. Can you tell us, like, what are the common mistakes that first-time reviewers usually do, or that we should try to avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is going to start to sound a bit redundant because it's really just the inverse of everything that we've been talking about to this point. So the first mistake that you make as a reviewer is you're a first-time reviewer and you're eager. So you accept a paper that's not relevant for you. So definitely do not agree to review a paper if it's not in your area or you don't think that there's something that you can contribute to it. Another issue with first-time reviewers is they might end up getting caught up on copy editing issues. Again, grammatical and typographical errors. These are not that important. The copy editing stage of the process will do this. you as a reviewer are being asked to review because of your expertise. So focus on that. Don't focus on sort of minor sort of grammatical or typographical errors. Now, it's okay to put a few in there, as I said before, in the sort of minor issues section, but don't spend a lot of time on this. A few others. First-time reviewers can be very funny. They can be very extreme. So they can be too accepting, where they just kind of agree with everything that is written, maybe because they're uncertain what to write, or they're not sure what the process is like as a reviewer. So they just kind of accept everything. Or conversely, they just critique everything almost pedantically, things that aren't even that important to the main argument. So, you know, what I try to do is try to be sort of in the middle path here. Don't be extreme of accepting too much, and don't be critical, rejecting everything. Another sort of mistake that first-time reviewers ask or do is they ask for unrelated changes or too dramatic changes. So they're asking the author to, you know, to run another experiment. So your paper was nice, but we would, you know, your conceptual paper reviewing the literature on X area was fantastic, but we would think it would, you know, this reviewer thinks it would be nice if you would do an experiment to test whether or not this is accurate. Well, that's not the point of this paper. So make sure that you're not asking for things outside the bounds of what that paper is attempting to do. This happens quite a bit. I mean, I've had, you know, reviewers ask me to do like secondary experiments to get a paper published. Don't do that. That's a very not relevant thing to the review. Like before, not giving enough detail. So you've made a sort of broad comment to the author, but it's not clear to the author where that is in the paper, or more, or as well. So in being detailed, I think it's also a very good practice to be constructive. So give a recommendation on how you think the author can improve the paper. That constructive idea about what the author can do is going to be very, very helpful. So the negative aspect of that is just not being detailed enough, not giving enough detail for the author to be able to follow. Asking the author to write your paper. So again, back to the, like, this is not your paper, this is the author's paper. So read it from their perspective, not from your perspective. So don't ask them to do your paper, your experiments that you think would be nice. And finally, being, you know, ad hominem attacks, attacking the character of the author, being rude. You know, we do this on top of everything else we do, and we get very little credit for this. So sometimes people are very exhausted when they're doing these reviews, and we can get a bit cantankerous. But this is the reason that I would recommend set out time in your schedule so that you can focus on this, and don't try to cram it in with everything else, because you want to make sure that the voice that you're giving to that author is a respectful, professional voice. It's not, you know, it's not a mean voice of somebody who hasn't had their morning coffee. So we have to make sure that we're being professional and respectful with this. And if you do it over a number of days instead of in one sitting, it will help you to manage the tone of the way that you want this review to be received by the editor, because the editor is going to see it first. And if the editor doesn't like it, she can send it back to you and say, I think that you haven't been detailed enough here. I'm not really sure what you're trying to say, or could you be a little bit more, you know, nice? So the editor is going to check it, and then the editor is going to take the comments from the different reviewers, collate them together, and send them out to that author. So make sure the tone and the voice that you're using is one that is respectful to everybody who's going to read this. So that again, you know, kind of relates to the earlier recommendation about making sure you schedule enough time to do these reviews very well, and that you're writing them in the voice that you really intended to write it in.
Perfect. Kevin, the points you mentioned are great. I've been taking notes. Like, you talked about the importance of being professional, being constructive, and I would like to follow that up with saying to our participants is that All right, sorry, I just received a Skype call. In the form that you will receive, guys, we just took into account that sometimes you might feel like, okay, this paper is really too bad, and I'm just not being able to be nice or constructive. So we're left a box for you towards the end of the paper, where this box is only for the editor. So there is a part where you can write a piece of writing that's only for me and for Helena, so we won't share with the reviewers. So there is a box for you that this writing will be shared with the authors, and a part where this will be shared only for the editors. And concerning,
that's sorry.
yes, yes,
Can I add to that? So that's a very good
sure.
point. I've been saying a lot about how we want to do justice to the authors, but the authors also have to do justice to you as a reviewer. So if something has been it's the editor's job to weed stuff out so that really bad stuff doesn't get to you. But if it does end up getting to you for whatever reason, and you read a methodology that makes no sense, or the paper clearly from the outset is going to be rejected, and you have a sincere sense that there's no point in you wasting your time, don't waste your time. Write a 1-paragraph comment back to the editor that this paper is not of the adequate quality to even be reviewed. It needs to just be rejected immediately, desk reject, back to the author. That is acceptable. If, however, you read it and you think this is really, really, really bad, but there are areas where I might be able to do some constructive work to mentor the author, then invest more time in it. But don't waste your time as well if the paper is just not worth it.
Yeah, and yeah, we definitely don't want to be too accepting. We don't want to be too rejecting, but we don't want to be too accepting. We actually received 26 articles, and I believe if we end up publishing volume 7 with the 12 articles, that would be great. So can we say, Kevin, for example, that we can afford a 50% rejection in this case?
I mean, that's fine. It's fine. Yeah, like rejection rates are a funny thing about journals.
Yeah, I was just like, I thought I would mention this so that you don't feel bad. For example, you might receive 3 articles and you really feel that 3 of them are rejection. Don't feel bad. Just like express what you read, as long as you're providing a rationale, like either for rejection or for accepting without changes. That would be great. Concerning the timing, the importance of sticking to the deadline, let's remind everyone that the deadline for submitting the first round of reviews would be 7th of May. So this is one thing. Another note I took is that, all right, now I will be just going through some main information about courage that we'd like you to be aware of. Helena, meanwhile, is taking notes of some of the questions that have been written in the chat box and that we haven't got to answer. After that, like in a 2 minutes time, I will hand over to Helena to ask the questions that you guys wrote in the box. Some quick information about the next stage. We have 36 peer reviewers currently on board. We'll start like from today or tomorrow. So we will send 2 or 3 articles to each one of you, either today or tomorrow. We will create a Facebook group, and the main purpose of this Facebook group is just like to be a platform where we can support each other. So if you have any questions, any concerns, you can write out there and we will be there to answer together with the other reviewers. The most important thing of that platform is like to try to keep to be anonymous, like not to mention too specific details about an article, I think for ethical concerns, because also get taken into account that sometimes we have peer reviewers who submitted articles, so we don't want to know which article we're talking about here. You will receive a form for reviewing, and like I mentioned, this form will include like a checklist at the beginning and then some boxes with like your overall impression, major issues, minor issues, your recommendation, the decision, rejection, acceptance, or not. Yeah, we will share with you a link to a recording of this session in case like people who missed it or you would like to go through it again or whatever. Yeah, I think these are the main points. And now I can hand over to Helena to see if we have any questions from participants.
Yes, there was a few questions that had already been answered. So I'll ask the ones that you haven't answered yet. So Sibylla asks, how can you write a critical review without being 100% familiar with the literature in that paper's specific area?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, maybe you're not so much familiar with the literature in that area. But you can go back to the sort of signpost of the paper, like the research question or the hypothesis, and you can indicate to the author whether or not there is a disconnect between that literature and that research question, or if there's a disconnect between the literature and the methodology. So signposting some of those key areas that a research paper should do would provide you the platform to be able to give what you might think of as sort of abstract or sort of standardized critiques on a paper, even if you aren't so much familiar with that particular literature. And again, that's fine, because you can read and comment on an article as long as you have expertise in one of the key areas of that paper. And if it's not the literature, that's fine. You can probably also get a sense for the literature in terms of whether the author has been very sort of clear in the way that he or she organized that literature. So is it organized in a clear way that there are 3 or 4 different areas of the literature that have been reviewed that are key to that area, and what is the gap that is coming out of what has been reviewed? So I think, as an author yourself, having written research papers and your thesis at Cambridge, you know what is expected in a literature review and in the rest of the research paper. So you can make comments that are more general to those particular sections. And I think as long as you're giving very detailed comments in other parts of the paper, then that will be fine. That will suffice. What are some key critiques? Like, what are questions that we ask as critical, right? So is the literature limited to one particular geographical region of the world? Is it limited to one particular area of education, like primary, secondary, tertiary, etc.? Are there areas where the literature might expand beyond those limitations that the author is only looking at these very niche or these very sort of focused areas? Is the literature not examining the methodology? So it's literature that is, it's a literature review that is reviewing the literature, but it's not describing the methods that have been used in this literature. Is everything that's been reviewed conceptual work, but it's not empirical work? So these are key areas that you could highlight for an author, that your paper is a conceptual paper, but it hasn't been tested empirically, and you haven't talked in the literature on whether or not it's been tested empirically by other authors. So you would want to look at key areas in terms of typology of research papers, what type, and that's a really important point for you too as a reviewer. Like, at the outset, know what type of paper you are reviewing. Is it a theoretical paper? Is it a conceptual paper? Is it an empirical paper? Is it a conjectural paper? And based off knowing what the point of that paper is, it will help you to moderate some of the critiques that you would have.
Thank you, Kevin. Sibylla and Liz also ask how to approach journals to be selected for peer reviewing.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so there are a few different ways. Probably the most common way to get selected as a peer reviewer is to be an author yourself. So once you start to produce your own research and to get it published in journals, and especially to get it published in flagship journals, which are the journals that people read frequently, your name is going to pop up, and the editors of other journals, they're going to come across your work, and if they like it, they're going to reach out to you when they have a paper that is in the area that they think you're an expert on that particular area. So the first way is for you to be producing your own work, but there are also lots of people who produce a lot of work, but they don't do reviews. So the second way is to make sure that you have an online footprint. Do you have ResearchGate? Do you have academia.edu? Do you have Google Scholar? So do you have Twitter? Is your name out there for editors of journals to find you? So you also need to have that footprint. And then a third way is just contact them. If you think that you're relevant for a particular journal, just contact the editor. Say, this is who I am. These are the areas that I could review for, and are you in the need of a reviewer? I've done this myself with the British Educational Research Journal, and yeah, they turned around and said, yes, we'd love for you to be a reviewer. So those three strategies are the ones that I would recommend. But you're going to need to start to get a footprint yourself in terms of your own research to have evidence that you are appropriate to review other people's work because you've actually produced research yourself. I mean, you would need this before you're going to get big journals to start to ask you to do this. And I think that's what a lot of you are doing. That's, to a very large extent, that's the point of courteous. Courteous and other graduate school early career research journals like this are working to develop the skill sets of their authors and reviewers, and they get your name out there so that you then can get involved and learn how to be involved with other journals.
Thank you, Kevin. Sabila just asked as a follow-up question on that, what level do you need to be to put yourself?
Sorry, to put yourself out there, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, to go forward for peer review.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the journal. So graduate school journals, again, you need to be in graduate school. But if you're doing a PhD right now, I think very much you could ask if journals are in need of reviewers for again, flagship journals, because often they are in need. And if you're in a PhD program, it indicates to the editor that you know at least the basic skills of what should be involved in this process. So I think if you're doing your PhD right now, you could certainly approach some journals and ask them. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no, but it's not a big deal. So definitely don't be shy. Do email them and do ask during your PhD if it's possible. And there's another tactic to help out here, both for you to get your name out there and to get experience, but also in terms of approaching the editors. Do they need somebody to write a book review? They often do, and often PhD students and master's students are the ones that are doing these book reviews. It gets your name in the journal, it helps editors to recognize you. And if the editor doesn't need a reviewer per se, maybe they would like to utilize your capacity as a contributor of a book review. So I would seek that out as well.
Thank you. I hope that answered your questions to Sabila. Camilla has asked how to navigate the line between recommendation that will strengthen the paper and something that is changing the nature of the paper.
So I think it depends on how much you, as the reviewer, believe that the recommendation that you are providing is, and again, is it a recommendation or is it a request? And that's not really a rhetorical question that I'm asking here, but are we being clear as reviewers in terms of whether or not what we are stating to the author is going to read this as a recommendation? In other words, recommendation is the author can say no and the journal is not going to reject it. And you, as the reviewer, when you have to do the second review of the paper and you get the comments back from the author, if you've given a recommendation and the author has declined the recommendation, that's truly a recommendation. But if it is a request, and now you're going to reject the paper because the author didn't make those changes. So I think it's important for us as reviewers to be clear what we mean and how is it interpreted by the author. Oftentimes authors will err on the side of caution, and they will end up doing everything that the reviewer asks because they're afraid of a rejection, especially with first-time authors who haven't been through the process, and they're very acquiescent to everything that the editor and the reviewer ask. So I think ask yourself that question first. Be clear how you write it, what the tone is in it, and ask yourself this: do you really need to write it? Like, do I really need to make this comment? Because if I do make this comment, probably the author is going to play with it. And is that going to satisfy me or not? So I think that's it. If it's really going to change the paper pretty drastically, you need to ask yourself if those changes really are needed. Because if they're not needed, then probably the comment, you might put the comment in the minor section, not the major section. This would actually help the author very well to know whether you're making a request or a recommendation. If it's in the minor section, like the end of your review, it might be something like, I really like what you did, but perhaps you might think this. And then the author can toil with it and think about how he or she might want to respond. So really, for you, how important is it to you as a reviewer that those changes are actually made? Think about that. And you need to put the changes that you really, really want to happen, they need to go to the top of your review. So the editor and the author are going to read it in the order of priority. So the comments at the bottom really aren't that important. So that's where I would put something that's more of a recommendation. Even if it might be big, it's a recommendation. And it might be something more along the lines of like, this hasn't been empirically tested. I'm not sure that you should do it in this paper, but I would recommend it for a future paper.
Thank you, Kevin. We're actually approaching the end of the session, and I would like to answer 2 questions in the chat box from Gambao and add 1 note. So Gambao, you're asking, how can I know if you have received my article? So this is a question from authors. I would like to say that once we send out all articles to reviewers, we will send out an email to all authors updating them that the papers have been sent to peer reviewing. And that would be also a confirmation that we received. And as long as they filled out the application form and they completed the process, then we definitely received the paper. The other question is, you said you wanted a 50% rejection rate. I did not say that. So let me clarify. What I mentioned, it was like I told Kevin, like we can afford a 50% rejection. And that was following up on the idea of whether we should be too accepting or too rejecting. So the implication of what I said is that we have 26 articles. Don't feel bad if you read a paper and you find don't feel bad to reject a paper, because our criteria, we would really want to ensure very high quality papers to be selected. Your question saying like, can you simply defer a publication till next year? The thing is, we have 26 papers. If these 26 papers are all really high quality papers, we're so happy to publish all of them, even if we have to publish that on 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. So there will be no rejection of a high quality paper that is at a level of acceptance and courage. The last note, Kevin talked about whether, like, when you have to make a decision whether you accept the paper or not. Let me say that, when you filled out, guys, the sign up form, you mentioned like what fields you would like to focus on, or what is the area of interest, what area of education is your interest. We made our best to match you up with a paper that aligns very well with your own interest. There are, I think, 4 reviewers of you who they specified an area that we haven't received article that aligns with their area of interest. But these reviewers have really like very interesting profiles, like a 3rd-year PhD at Cambridge. And that's why only these people, if you feel that the article might not align with your interest, we will send you a note that this article doesn't align with the interest that you expressed. So can you please confirm that you're still okay with reviewing it? All right. In any cases, if you feel that you're not comfortable with the paper, please write back to us and let us know. We're so happy to assign the paper for someone else. And let me add to that each article will be reviewed by 3 different reviewers, just to ensure that we receive comprehensive feedback from 3 different parties to assist us to make a final decision.
Basma, can you
yes.
also confirm, because 2 people have asked, if something is published with Cora J, can it be published somewhere else?
I think they will face the issue with the other journal, because I think no journal would accept to publish an already published work, right, Kevin? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, That's exactly what I would say. So typically what happens with journals, and remember that this is proprietary. These are products. These journals own this. They make money off of this. So it's not just scholarly in the sense that we think about it. So when a journal accepts the paper and publishes it, that paper is the sole property of that journal. It can't be published in another journal. There are exceptions to this. If you get the permission of the journal that it was published in, and the journal that wants to publish it contacted you to ask if they could reproduce it, and then you say, yes, you have permission from the original journal to reproduce. That is fine. But you as an author cannot publish the work in one journal and then send the work to another journal for peer review. That would be a big no-no.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
Perfect. So do we have any more questions, Helena, or I think we answered.
We did have one about Suzanne. She asked if you should write in the second person or in the third person when doing your review. I don't think it's going to be an issue. You can decide to write you or the author. I don't think we have an issue with that. It does depend from journal to journal, but we don't mind, do we?
Yeah. All right. So yeah, seems we got to the end of the session. Thank you so much, everyone, again, for joining us today. Let's hope that the recording goes smoothly, like saving the recording and everything. We will make sure to share a link of this session with you. We'll follow this up with emails with you all. You will receive the email either today or tomorrow, because we're dividing the process in 2 days. Kevin, we're incredibly grateful for your time, for the very valuable insights and recommendations and tips that you provided us with. We're really appreciative of your time. And yeah, I will make sure to acknowledge your contribution to Courage, because honestly, I always believe that peer reviewers, you guys either make or break a journal. You either make volume 7 or you cause issues in it. And I have very high expectations that this volume is going to be great because of the quality, mainly the quality of the papers. I already have a look there. We really have very interesting papers. And at the same time, we have very interesting people with very interesting profiles that I'm sure hopefully the whole process will be straightforward and successful. And we will celebrate all together the publication of volume 7, I hope in Cambridge in October. Anything you would like to add?
No, I mean, I would just agree with what you said. The peer reviewers are the key elements in this entire process, and they do their magic behind the scenes. You know, they're a bit like Oz. So, but without them, these journals wouldn't be where they are, and we wouldn't have the integrity and quality that we do in academic research. So they're very, very key. But the last thing that I would say is I would just tweet this. I'm just going to summarize everything in a very succinct bit. So if I try to summarize everything that we've been talking about, you as a first-time reviewer, these are the key elements. In your reviews, be constructive and be specific. Write a review that's somewhere between 500 to 1,500 words, so 1 to 3 pages. And in the process of doing that, write from the major issues to the minor issues in an inverse pyramid. So summary, major issues, minor issues. And in that 1 minute right there, you've got the key elements that you need to be a reviewer. But thank you guys very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone. Keep well and healthy and safe, and hope to see you soon, all in Cambridge very soon. Take care. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.